So my name is Rasa Juknevičienė. I am a member of European Parliament from Lithuania, second term, mainly working in security, defense, foreign affairs, Eastern Partnership countries, Russia, of course, as it's a main source of all problems around. Also in DROA subcommittee, I see our EPP coordinator from Luxembourg, MEP from Luxembourg, Isabel Lima Wissler is here. She is important in this human rights subcommittee because we will be talking, we will be speaking about that, and maybe in the future we will be able also to put this on DROA agenda, maybe, I hope so still. So thank you for your coming. My messages will be, as I think not the first time, those who will listen from here from me will be not very new, but I have to say that Russia is the last colonial empire, I would say, globally. And I will underline colonial empire. And this is very important message to send from this event. Actually, this is the main reason why we are doing such events and not the first time. So while other colonial empires underwent decolonization and political transformation in the 20th century, Russia did not fundamentally abandon its imperial model. Preserving centralized control over diverse peoples and resource-rich territories. Russia's imperial structure transformed in form Tsarist, Soviet, federal, but not in logic. Russia's imperial policy shows clear continuity from the Tsarist era through the Soviet period to the present-day Russian Federation. From the 16th century onward, Moscow expanded in all directions through military conquest, from Central Europe and the Baltic region, including the partisans of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, to the Caucasus, Crimea, Central Asia, Siberia, subjugating the locals, extracting resources, and systematically imposing Russification as a tool of territorial consolidation and imperial control. The Soviet Union formally recognized national republics, so-called national republics, but maintained strict central control, carried out mass deportations of entire peoples, and continued large-scale resource exploitation. Under Putin, federal autonomy has been further dismantled, regional movements suppressed, and indigenous activists increasingly criminalized. Territorial expansion and Russification were central objectives of this policy and remain so today. This we see in occupied Ukrainian territories undergoing. As a result of centuries of colonization, repression, and forced assimilation, some nations have disappeared entirely, while others have been reduced to critically small populations. Aggressive imperial and colonial policy still insufficiently recognized in European debate. Ruski Mir ideology, expansionist and domination-based narrative. Drawing your attention to I would like to draw your attention on European Parliament resolution, Russia's disinformation and historical falsification to justify its war of aggression against Ukraine. This is the title of the resolution. We adopted it last year, 23rd of January. The text mentions Russia's imperial pursues an Ruski Mir ideology. I think it's the only European Union document, despite that it's only resolution, but nevertheless, Ruski Mir totalitarian ideology is mentioned already in official and voted by the whole parliament resolution. Continuation of the same war Putin wages against Ukraine is internally waged against indigenous people. Therefore, repression of indigenous peoples not a marginal issue, part of a broader colonial strategy of subjugation. It is our third joint event with the ADC Memorial on the same topic, on this topic, and I am happy that more and more people joining us. By the way, it's also broadcasted, as I know. In 2023, we had an event with the title Opposing Russian Colonial Oppression, Voices of Different Peoples. In 2025, Exploited Lands, Oppressed Peoples, Discrimination and Repression of Indigenous Peoples of Siberia, the North and the Far East of Russia. Over the years, we had testimonies from Shore people, Chukchi representatives, Chechens, now Crimean Tatars, Samis, Buryats. Important to bring these voices to the European Parliament. Where else, not in European Parliament, in the very heart of European democracy. So thanks to ADC Memorial Brussels for our long-standing already cooperation. Special thanks to Stefania and Olga. I also want to thank my team, Yeva and other members of my team for a very, how to say, motivated in involvement into this process. And now I will give the floor to Stefania. She will be the main panelist also, but also she will also be the boss of this meeting, the main boss of this meeting.
Thank you very much. Thank you for hosting us again and for this long-term cooperation on a really important issue. Our organization opposing discrimination, exclusion and promoting minorities, indigenous people's rights, really appreciate this possibility to raise these issues now here in Brussels. I also want to thank everybody who came or joined online. And most of all, I'm grateful to our speakers. The event is called Voices of Indigenous Peoples, so it's not my voice that has to sound today. I will just introduce the speakers and introduce the concept that is behind our event planning that we proposed as event particularly focusing on repression. Our previous events were dedicated more to discrimination, environmental rights, destruction of traditional way of life of indigenous peoples. This time we are only focusing on repression because it got incredible level and now concerns most of indigenous peoples that Russia oppresses. We know since 2014 it has been a tragedy for Crimean Tatars, second time in their history. But in the last years it targeted significantly indigenous peoples of the Urals, like Bashkir community. It targets now very small groups, like those almost disappearing indigenous peoples of Siberia and Far East and North to dramatic level, while forcing some on immigration, some in prison. I'm very grateful that we have a speaker from the voice from this group. Unfortunately, because of the documents problems, our colleague Valentina Sovkina could not come, but she'll speak online. We have Mr. Eskander Bariev, who came all the way from Kiev, especially for our event, because he cannot work anymore on human rights of Crimean Tatars in Crimea. And Mr. Ruslan Valiev, who will represent Bashkir community and Bashkir case. Just to give a brief overview, and maybe a bit of emotional push, we would like to show a little video, a clip that gives you a general idea of what's going on, and definitely it will not explain everything, so we will have a follow-up by the speakers' presentations.
17 декабря 2025 года
On December 17, 2025, arrests, searches and detentions of indigenous residents of the country were carried out simultaneously in several regions of Russia. They are accused of involvement in a fictitious, non-existent organization previously designated as terrorist by the court. None of the defendants were ever aimed to overthrow the government. These people were experts in the field of indigenous rights and worked to improve international norms. We call on the Russian Federation to approve and ratify the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and ILO Convention 169. Today, Daria Yegoreva is under arrest. She is prohibited from visiting her family and friends. She faces 20 years in prison for speaking at the UN. Similar charges have been brought against other indigenous people who spoke at the UN. On January 17, 2024, thousands of residents of Bashkortostan took to the streets to support Fail Alzinov, an environmental activist and one of the main political opponents of the head of the Republic of Bashkortostan. Under temperatures of minus 30 degrees centigrade, people stood outside the courthouse from early morning. The crowd demanded the activists' release and to end the prosecution. Ultimately, Fail Alzinov was sentenced to 4 years in prison for inciting hatred. The rally ended with the protesters being dispersed using batons, tear gas and stun grenades. In response, snowballs were thrown at the security forces. 2 days after the verdict, rallies continued in Ufa, the capital of Bashkortostan. Hundreds of protesters danced in circles and sang songs in Bashkir language. But this time, too, the protests ended with a despair and arrests. Rifat Dautov found himself at the rally site by chance. He was on his way to meet his girlfriend. He was later detained under suspicion of participating in the riots. The next day, a police officer visited his parents and invited them to the morgue for identification. No criminal investigation into the death was opened. The family believes the security forces are trying to make Rifat's death during arrest appear to be an accident. Another defendant in the Baymak case was pensioner Mindyar Bayguskarov. He committed suicide as a result of torture and abuse. None of the deaths or injuries sustained by the defendants in the Baymak events were properly investigated. No law enforcement officers were held accountable. These facts highlight the lack of a human rights system in Russia, where the exercise branch dominates the legislative and judicial branches.
Отсутствие системы соблюдения прав человека в России, где исполнительная власть доминирует над законодательной.
Why are they beating me? Well, look what they are doing. Look. Moreover, the punishments are carried out with a demonstrative cruelty to serve as a warning to others. The Baymak case is one of the most high-profile repressive cases in Russia. The exact number of defendants remains unknown. According to various sources, there are more than 80. In late February 2014, armed men without insignia appeared in Crimea. They were called polite men. They seized the key facilities, including the Crimean parliament. Vladimir Putin would later confirm that they were Russian military personnel. As a result, by mid-March 2014, virtually the entire peninsula came under the control of Russian forces. The referendum held on March 16 became the primary political instrument for the annexation of Crimea. This procedure was not only of dubious legality, but also clearly violated international law. The Crimean Peninsula is the historical home of the Crimean Tatar people. The majority of this ethnic group lives here. The highest representative body is the Crimean Tatar Majlis, which did not support the annexation. In 2016, the Russian Federation designated the Majlis a banned extremist organization. This act provided legal tools for persecuting criminal Tatars who openly expressed their views. Emir Yasani was sentenced by a Russian court to 12 years in a maximum security penal colony. Rustem Ismailov received an even longer sentence, 13 and a half years. Rustem was effectively sentenced to such a gigantic prison term simply because of his meetings and reading of religious literature. Moreover, the harsh arrests and searches were carried out in the presence of the suspect's young children. Rustem had two sons and a daughter. Timur Shaymardanov was a significant political figure. Recognizing his authority among the local population, the Russian authorities tried to secure Timur's support for the new regime. After a firm refusal, Shaymardanov disappeared. His family believes Timur was physically killed by polite people. To this day, there is no information about Timur's fate.
После решительного отказа Шаймарданов исчез. Родные считают, что Тимур был физически устранен вежливыми людьми. До сих пор о судьбе Тимура нет никакой информации.
Thank you very much. It was just like such a little beginning, not very detailed, and I must say some facts are rather old that were shown about Crimea, and therefore the first word has Mr. Eskander Bariev, who will definitely give us much more relevant information about the events related to discrimination and repressions of Crimean Tatars in occupied Crimea.
Спасибо, Стефания.
Thank you, Stefania. Hello, distinguished MEPs, distinguished representatives of the EU institutions, ladies and gentlemen. For me, it's a great honor to be in Brussels and to take the floor in the heart of united Europe, where all Ukrainian nation and people would like to join. And this striving, unfortunately, is assessed and we pay a big toll for that. But we would like to be a part of a big European family. And first of all, I would like to thank the European Union through you for supporting Ukraine in fighting against military crimes committed by the Russian Federation in the territory of Ukraine. What happens today is not an accident. This is the continuation of genocidal policy started by the Russian Empire in 1873 and continued by the Soviet regime in 1944 and renewed by the modern Russia in 2014. So the period of getting the Crime's Han area, then the Crimean Tatars were deported from Crimea in 2014, the occupation of Crimea, and deportation of 1944 was the situation when Crimean Tatars were deported from their homeland. It was the Genocide Act to annihilate this cultural and human unity. And the war with Ukraine started in 2014 with the occupation of Crimea. Can we show the slides of the presentation, please? Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, you can see the presentation that we've prepared, and the things that are happening today is not an accident. This is the continuation of the genocidal policy started by the Russian Empire in 1883 when the Crime's Han's area was seized, and then in 1944 was the total deportation of the Crimean Tatar, and in 2014 the occupation of Crimea started. The milestone was the deportation of 1944 when the entire Crimean Tatars were forcefully deported from their homeland. It was the Genocide Act aimed at annihilation of the people as a political, cultural, and social unity. Russian aggression against Ukraine started not in 2022, as some people believe. Yes, but in 2014, because the Russian informants were saying that the Crimea wanted to become the part of Russia by itself, but it was not the case. There were victims, murders, and there were protests. Next slide, please. And here on the slide, you can clearly see that about 15,000 residents of the peninsula responded to the call of the Mejlis of the Crimean Tatar people and expressed their support to the territorial integrity of Ukraine. Mostly these were Crimean Tatars, ethnical Ukrainians, pro-Ukrainian citizens, and they did not allow the parliament to adopt a criminal decision. And then it was decided that that was the case when the people expressed their position and supported the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. It was this people became one of the first targets of the aggressor, and due to that, reprisals and persecutions of Crimean Tatars started, because the Mejlis of the Crimean Tatar people was one of the first representative bodies that addressed the Ukrainian parliament and the entire Ukrainian people, and supported sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. And Mejlis defined its future as the future together with democratic Ukraine. Next slide. In total, when we started documenting all violations from 2017 to 2025 in the occupied Crimea, over 10,727 violations of fundamental human rights were recorded. 7,166 of them were committed against representatives of the indigenous Crimean Tatar people. It was to suppress the indigenous people. Systemic political reprisals, mass-scale searches and arrests started. 340 political prisoners are the 179 of them are the representatives of the Crimean Tatar. 510 fabricated criminal accusations of terrorism and extremism. 276 of them were against Crimean Tatar people. Next slide. 61 persons. And next one. Here you can see the diagram of cases. This is clickable. You click and get the details and the names under each category. Certainly, we do not want to say that we have comprehensive data, because the data that we illustrate is the data that we could document and record. We have full cases. You could see the video how mass persecutions and prosecutions started. And 61 persons were killed. 29 of them were the Crimean Tatar people. From our side, we developed special classifications to classify criminal cases, murder cases, depending on how the case happened. Next slide. 29 people were abducted over the occupation period of Crimea. Not found yet. 19 of them were the Crimean Tatars. You could see Timur Shaymardanov. I knew him very well. I know him because we are not sure where he is at the moment. But the thing is that too many years have passed, and the last time we saw each other when there was the live chain to protect Ukrainian military forces from the green or polite people of Russia. And then They started suppressing Majlis. They started pushing out the people from their homeland. They started destroying their cultural identity. They started changing the landscape of the peninsula. It should be noted that reprisals are not against activists only, but against the people who are political actors. The guilt is the citizens' position and loyalty to Ukraine and national identity. Next slide. Over the recent years, we can see the following picture. You can see these searches. Searches are not accidental. They are systematic. They are scheduled. They are committed in the Crimean Peninsula. Next slide. Detentions. Again, we can see hundreds of detentions committed in Crimea. And we have started documenting since 2022 in the Kherson and Zaporizhia regions where they have the people from the Crimean Tatars. We can see the same things committed against them. Next, mass arrests. You can see arrests continue. These are initial arrests and arrests upon sentencing. You could hear 13 and a half years, but the longest sentence, it was against Skender Kuduzov, 29 years and 6 months for being engaged in the local militia force, but then he was replaced as a prisoner of war thanks to the activity of our organization and all other stakeholders, including the representatives of the European Parliament and European Union. Next slide. Systemic violations include mass interrogations. You can see the dynamics. So this is a systemic process. Next slide. There are systemic violations of the right to a fair trial. When defense counsels appeal, they are rejected, or these appeals are revoked. They use mock or hidden witnesses, and people do not get the right of a fair trial, and people cannot address the court in their native language, in the Crimean Tatar language. We know about 30 cases like that. Next slide. This is violation of the right to health. So people get no access to medical care. Political prisoners who are in Russian prisons and in detention centers are tortured systemically. They are placed in punishment cells, and they are not getting medical aid. Next, I will show you the figures about victims. There are people who died in prisons. These are not figures, these are not statistics, but lives of people. Next slide. So what are the key criminal articles or charges against people? First of all, Hizb ut-Tahrir cases. When Russia occupied Crimea, they started prosecuting for participating in meetings. For May 3rd, when the Crimean Tatars went to meet Mustafa Jamil, and one of the first searches happened in my house, and against me they started the criminal case, and according to courts, I'm arrested in absentia. Next, Hizb ut-Tahrir cases started. They started using the Russian legislation to prosecute people under the Hizb ut-Tahrir case, and these are the people who have nothing to do with Hizb ut-Tahrir. Second, in Ukraine, Hizb ut-Tahrir is not a restricted organization, and the people who support Hizb ut-Tahrir were not dangerous before occupation. There were no issues in Ukraine. There was no interreligious tension. So these people have never shown any signs of committing any terrorism or whatever. So we can see that Russia, in order to persecute the Crimean Tatars, leverages these criminal articles. Second, high treason cases. We can see more of those starting from 2022. And also terrorist acts, discreditation of Russian military forces, extremism. Next, on June 1st, 2022, the Supreme Court of the Russian Federation ruled that Narman Japan unit was the terrorist organization. They did that in order to prosecute Crimean Tatars in the Kherson region, and mass detentions and arrests started in the Yedinich district in Kherson region. The occupants planned to arrest 250 people. According to our data, 73 people are under the case of the Naman unit case. For you to understand this case, in 2015, there was the civil blockade of Crimea in order to stop the supplies of contraband into the occupied area of Crimea of food, chemical products, construction materials, in order to show their position that Crimea is occupied. So if Russia controls Crimea, then Russia should provide this not by providing Ukrainian food. So the Asker organization provided legal support to the Ukrainian border guard forces and prevented the transit of contraband products. Therefore, the Russian occupational authorities have been trying to leverage this article to prosecute all people who live or used to live close to the border line. And then they started prosecuting not only the activists who had nothing to do with Majlis, but ordinary taxi drivers, entrepreneurs. They started picking them up from hotels. They started quartering their soldiers, Russian soldiers, in those hotels, or they quarter their offices in residential buildings of those people. So we can see that there are accusations and charges for cooperation with the Ukrainian Special Forces, for high treason, etc. And I would like to pay your attention to the fact that in 2025 we could see the following trend, which is quite concerning to us. Political prisoners who are in Russian prisons are revoked of Russian citizenship, and they are from Ukraine. So people were forcefully naturalized, so they were turned into Russian citizens. They were charged and sentenced as Russian citizens. And now they no longer have their Russian citizenship, and after serving their terms, they won't be able to get home to Crimea. So we do not know how long the Crimean occupation will continue. Therefore, many Crimean Tatars were born in the deportation sites in the countries of Central Asia, and after serving their terms, they can be deported to the Central Asian countries. For us, it's a big challenge. Right now, we have to get ready for the intermediary countries to support Ukraine in getting these people back to Ukraine. In addition, I would like to say that in line with this new Russian legislation, they can cancel the citizenship of those people who are not registered at the military units at the place of their residence, and also they can be charged for sabotage and terrorism. This is about political prisoners and those Crimean Tatars. We urge them not to serve in the military forces of Russia, not to be engaged in mobilization, not to be enlisted in the Russian army, for them not to become criminals and not to commit crimes in Ukraine. Next slide. One more. Well, actually, I've mentioned it already, so next slide. So I've said that 340 political prisoners are there, 179 of them are Crimean Tatars. Next slide. And now you can see that at least 52 women are political prisoners. 17 of them are Crimean Tatars. 57 young people have been politically persecuted by the occupying authorities. 37 of them are Crimean Tatars. Next, 28 elderly political prisoners are held in Russian pretrial detention centers and colonies. 16 of them are Crimean Tatars, and 10 Crimean Tatars are they are people with disabilities, and they are held in Russian prisons. 8 of them are Crimean Tatars. Next slide. 3 political prisoners died in Russian prisons in recent years: Konstantin Shirin, Rustam Veratsy, and Jamil Gafarov, because they were prosecuted, sentenced, and no medical aid was provided to them when they were in critical condition. So I should say that it's critically important for us to unite forces in order to protect indigenous peoples amid this interstate conflict. One of the forms of protection would be to draft the action plan to support indigenous peoples in the OSCE region, and the EU countries are part of OSCE. Next, it's critically important for us in the future to provide support to Ukraine. Speaking of the Ukrainian level, it's vitally important for us to adopt. It was vitally important for us that the law on the Crimean Tatars was adopted. It was a huge hit to the Russian aggression, but unfortunately, the enforcement of this law is very slow, and legalization of the Majlis of the Crimean Tatars is still under progress. It's very important for the Crimean Tatars to have their representation as Majlis in Ukraine. It's critically important for indigenous peoples to feel support of the entire civilized world, because we are speaking about direct violations of international humanitarian laws, and this is in line with the international definition of genocidal alienation, when indigenous people cannot live as an independent group, and like Lithuania and other countries, 8 countries of Europe recognize the Crimean occupation as genocide of Crimean Tatars. This is an illustration and a reminder to the whole world that all crimes shall be remembered and prevented, like Holodomor, Holocaust, and forceful deportations of entire peoples to fully annihilate them. The European Union has always positioned itself as a space for protection of peoples, so we, the peoples of Ukraine and of Crimea, see our future, among the free, democratic, pro-European Ukraine, and we believe that together we'll be able to overcome all these challenges and to protect indigenous peoples. Thank you.
Clear and very profound analysis of the situation that shows ethnic profiling in political repressions of Crimean Tatars. I remember since 2014 there was quite a discussion. Not everybody agreed about ethnic and religious profiling in the political repressions, and not just repressing political Tatars as political opponents of Russian occupation, Russian regime. But I think with all the data you show, it's impossible not to see the obvious thing that the indigenous peoples of Crimea are repressed systematically, and that the fact that they have certain names, appearance, religion influence these ethnically profiled repressions. Now I want to make a little bridge, because Majlis of Crimean Tatars peoples was the first organization of indigenous peoples recognized as extremist in Russian Federation and repressed as a whole, but further it went significantly, and in 24 lots of other organizations were recognized extremists and later even terrorists, among them organizations of small indigenous peoples like Aboriginal Forum and others. And I hope we can have online participation of our colleague Valentina Sovkina, activist of Sámi people, who will tell us more about the repressions that happened in December 25 and that she became also victim of.
Добрый день.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Distinguished participants of the meeting, I am very happy to be here. The facts mentioned before me by Eskander provide a comprehensive landscape of what's going on in Russia. I'm of the Sámi people, and my people used to live in the area without boundaries. They could freely move in the Sámi area, and each one of us has a place which is a homeland where we have our roots. Therefore, I'm sure that you will listen and hear me, and you will understand me, because I'm speaking about the future. I'm speaking about the rights of the indigenous peoples of the Russian Federation in the context of international standards, and first of all, the Declaration of the UN on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and the IOL 169 Convention. What you could see in the video is Daria Igoreva saying about that. This is not options or political rhetoric. It's a system of political commitments. These are the norms. These norms were not established as the leverage to states, but to ensure dialogue, to prevent conflicts, and to ensure long stability, self-determination, connection to roots, and participation in decision-making is not a threat to the state, but the foundation of resilient society. The European Union is based on the basic democratic principle. States serve people, not people serve states. The first who feel the breakage of it are indigenous peoples, because they lose their voices, their land, and they are disengaged from decision-making. Without referring to these documents, the talks about our rights are partial. And here we should fix the critical thing. Recognition of rights and without the enforcement is not a fulfillment of the international right, but an imitation. At an open session at the UN Council on Human Rights in Geneva, Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres, said as follows about this international principle. The UN Charter, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and international human rights law are not a menu. The leaders may not pick up the parts they like and ignore the rest. This principle fully applies to the rights of indigenous peoples. International law is not a menu. You may not choose one or two suitable clauses and state that you respect the rights of the indigenous people and ignore other obligations. You may not recognize cultural and rights without recognizing the right to land. You may not be speaking about engagement if people are disengaged from decision making. You may not refer to international norms and at the same time to prosecute for referring to these norms. The international law is operational only when it is coherent in its enforcement. Today, between these principles and reality, there is a gap. In December 2025, in a number of areas of Russia, there were coordinated searches, detentions, arrests of indigenous peoples. It was a repressive act of intimidation for peaceful, environmentally friendly, and cultural activity. I was personally involved in these activities, and today I'm talking to you via the internet, not because I want to, but because I am limited in my movement because of the reprisals and repressions. I have limitations on my movement. Peaceful protection of rights is frequently interpreted as a threat to security. Self-organization as non-loyalty and referring to international mechanisms as unfriendly actions. Therefore, this brings to silencing. People are afraid to express their voices. Problems accumulate, trust is destroyed, and this creates humanitarian and strategic risks. Suppression of engagement does not address the problem. This gets us deeper. The absence of dialogue increases tension. Fear destroys the society faster than open and honest disagreement. Indigenous peoples are not aliens, and they are not a political opposition. They are part of the country. They are carriers of unique knowledge about the areas and ecosystems shaped by generations in their indigenous lands. Disengagement of the indigenous peoples from decision-making brings to environmental crisis, loss of trust, and destroying of stability in long term. What can be done? First, to recognize that peaceful protection of rights of indigenous peoples is not an extremism. Separation of cultural, environmental, and societal actions are not a threat. Second, we should establish safe channels for indigenous peoples to be able to be speaking without fear of intimidation. They have to be the actors in decision making. We shall be discussing alternatives. Third, consultations on land, environment, and development shall be back, and indigenous peoples shall be engaged. Supporting traditional natural resource use shall be a matter of discussion. And the last, international norms shall serve as a beacon, not as an accusation. The Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and the IOL ruling 169 shall be the guidelines for working with the indigenous peoples. Public authorities shall be educated in the rights of the indigenous peoples. And finally, we are speaking not only about the rights of the indigenous peoples, but about choosing the language, either the language of force or responsibility, and the ability to address sophisticated challenges without finger-pointing your enemies. Changes rarely start inside the system. This happens in the brains of people who think in a different way. So this is a call for shared responsibility and joint action. History proves the things we called utopia yesterday become a norm. Dialogue, respect, and engagement are not the manifestations of a weakness, but of strengths. When there is one person getting a voice, tomorrow there can be two and more. This is the strengths of resilience, development, and understanding. The events of the last 3 months have indicated that we may not be silent, and today we call this event the voice. The voice shall sound. So we call and urge you to join the voices of the indigenous people and Free Daria flash mob. You should post a video where the person says Free Daria. You can make it with the paper saying Free Daria. You can post it to the address that I'm going to show on the screen, and we will definitely happy to see that in your national languages. Free Daria, Balt Dari. So this is in the language of Sámi. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Valentina. I just want to connect for those who maybe need it that Daria Yegereva was arrested. Those who are late maybe haven't seen her. She was on the screen. She was arrested in December 25. Among many people who were searched and threatened with arrests was also Valentina. She had to flee Russia immediately, even though she's an official representative of Indigenous Peoples in the UN from Russian Indigenous Peoples. And Daria got in prison, not only she, but she's the only one who is public about that. And definitely we very much support participating in the campaign of liberation of her and others accused in terrorism, just like many Crimean Tatars, for just protecting the rights of Indigenous peoples, that she belongs to. Daria Yegereva belongs to Selkup indigenous group of Siberia. Thank you very much. And our last speaker is Ruslan Valiyev, and he's going to speak about this dramatic repression of Bashkir peoples that we've also seen in the video called Baymak case, because of the place where most of people got arrested, and that's one of the most mass ethnically profiled political repression that I know of in the borders of Russian Federation.
Good day. My English is not very good. I will continue in Russian.
Distinguished members of the European Parliament, human rights defenders, ladies and gentlemen, this is my objective to present the situation in the Republic of Bashkortostan, to say a few words about this republic, about these people, and what challenges we have been facing. I would like to thank the organizers that before meeting us, you've displayed the video, and this video has already delivered the message. Well, at least you could see the picture for what I would like to illustrate. First of all, Bashkortostan is a republic that has been a part of the Russian Federation for ages, not like Crimea that has been occupied for a long period. This is the difference. But historically, you should understand that naturally, this is the indigenous non-Russian land. The Autochthon people are Bashkirs who entered the Russian kingdom in prior imperial ages when Ivan the Horrible ruled. And we have been a colonized nation in 400 years. We know at least 5. Well, this is mentioned in the Russian history as the protests of Bashkirs. And Bashkirs, or Bashkorts, as we call ourselves, these were wars for independence from Moscow. These wars happened in the 17th and 18th centuries. By the 19th century, they were stopped. But in early 20th century, after the First World War, and due to the October Revolution in the Soviet Russia, they created autonomous republics. So the first autonomous republic was the Bashkir Autonomous Republic of the USSR. And that was also thanks to the military fighting of Bashkorts who remembered that they wanted freedom and they wanted to get out of the future USSR back in 1917. In the 1990s, when there was the wave of democratization, our republic had a few attributes of statehood, the anthem, the national emblem, constitution. And these documents and instruments expressed that we had certain sovereignty inside the Russian Federation, but then we got on the track that brought us to today. And you know what's going on. Our colleague mentioned everything, including the war, and Bashkirs, unfortunately, fight in this war on the side of Kremlin. You are aware this happens across the whole country. This is inevitable, but what's important is that the Bashkirs show the highest numbers of deaths in the war against Ukraine. Putin is not sorry about them, but there are things explaining these horrible statistics. This is a huge republic. It exceeds many nations of Europe. The area-wise and the economic potential-wise, we have 4 million people. Out of them, about 1.2 million people are native Bashkirs. The same number of people believe themselves Tatars, not the Crimean Tatars. Don't be confused, but these are historical Tatars who live in the Povolzhye area, Tatarstan, and other words refer to that. These are different Tatars. This is just for your understanding. And 1/3 of the population are Russian language people. But in recent years, in the last 25 years, since federalization was ceased to exist, all rights of this republic were terminated. Next, Russification has been going on, and suppression of everything that has to do with the indigenous people. There is the law of Putin of 2017. Today, indigenous peoples do not have to study. They do not have a must to study their native languages. There are other areas where the situation is more horrible, but even Bashkirs, a huge nation, face this challenge. And there are many other limitations that we have been facing. So the people who referred to that, who highlighted that, got under repression, and the institutions that worked on this agenda were called the terrorist organizations, and the people who were engaged in their activities were either detained and they find themselves in prisons or in exile. The Bashkort organization, it's named after the name of its people, is a good example of that. The activists of this organization in the past, the activists of this organization, or the people who showed solidarity with this organization, became the victims of the Baimak case, which was illustrated in the video. January 2024, the war in Ukraine goes on. All repressive laws are enforced in Russia. If there is a group of 3 people, this is an unauthorized meeting, and 2,000 people came in Bashkortostan to support an activist who was saying, this is our land and we shall protect our natural treasures. So dozens of our people are detained. 90% of them have been sentenced to 5 years in prison on average, and right now they sentence 10 organizers. These are accidental people. They were finger-pointed as organizers. They will serve 10 plus years in prison. The Bainax case illustrates the readiness of the Bashkir people to fight for their rights. On the other hand, this illustrates the readiness of the regime of Kremlin to suppress in harsh manner any activities. Separately, I would like to mention the policy of politician Airat Butikhamekov. He serves 9 years in prison. Back in 2019, prior to the war, he was sentenced, and the first time Kremlin started suppressing him in 2005, when nobody thought that Russia had any political repressions, when Vladimir Putin was happy to visit all these beautiful places, and he continued to visit them for a long time. And Muhammadov was saying in the public space that there are challenges of indigenous peoples, and these challenges may not be neglected. He served 2 terms. In 2018, he said, I would like to become the leader of Bashkortostan. He was not allowed to be participating in the election, and then he was sentenced again, and soon, I hope, he will stop serving his 9-year term. This is tied to our other political prisoners. There are multiple political prisoners everywhere in the Crimea and other places. If you look at the numbers of people, it seems to me that we should pay attention to these people, to these fates, and we should do everything possible in order to get them out of prisons, to swap them, and those who are released, for them to be allowed to enter the European Union. This person is soon to celebrate his 80th anniversary. He will be released in a couple of years, and there will be no place for him to move into. And I have no authority to address. Well, I personally thank Germany, because we were supported by the special program that has been suspended. So using this opportunity, I would like to say that we should do something about it. Well, there are other people who are responsible for that. There is the platform under the Parliamentary Assembly of Europe, but I am forced to mention it. At the end, I would like to say that we, the indigenous peoples, exist, and we shall not be called Russians. We have the passports of Russia, but we are not Russians. For example, back in the USSR times, the economy of Bashkortostan exceeded the economy of many other republics of USSR. But we were unlucky. They were one of the 15 republics, and we were the autonomous republic inside the Russian Republic. So we had to stay there, and right now they engage us in the war on the side of Kremlin. This is a different story, but this is just as a disclaimer. Thank you very much. I appreciate the organizers and everybody who is hosting us here. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, all the speakers. Thank you, Valentina, if you still hear us. Thank you, Eskander and Ruslan. I think that it gives us some brief impression from what's going on with peoples who are oppressed, repressed, discriminated, excluded, and forced into criminal activities as participants of the war. And definitely, it's very good that their names are mentioned, that their stories are heard, and I really hope that all these people will not be forgotten and really not mixed up together with the empire politics of Russia that they're not responsible for. Thank you.
Okay, as I understand, you now looked at me, and I will take the lead of the debate. So now is the time for questions and answers, interventions from audience. Just the last speaker reminded me my experience. You know, you mentioned that those so-called Soviet republics were lucky. They got independence. Of course, Lithuanian case was different because we did that before dissolution of Soviet Union. 1990, but nevertheless, I remember very well those first my visits abroad, especially to the so-called Western countries, and everywhere, very many people, including politicians, their understanding was that we are Lithuanians like Russians, but some kind of separatists, little bit different Russians. nothing about different nations, nothing about those who were colonized deeply, more deep into in Russian Federation, even less information than about us. Even my friends from Norway, Norwegians, in 1991, 92, they were saying to me with some apologies, saying that, oh, Rasa, we didn't know that you exist, even elder generation, not young people. So imagine what happened over 50 years only during our Lithuanian occupation. And even my name, which is very Lithuanian, is to translate Rasa means dew or drops of water in the morning. Many of them, they asked me, is the same name as Raisa Gorbacheva? So it took maybe 10 years to talk with the people to say that we are not Russians, we are different, we have our own language, our history, our culture. So even more difficult for nations. Many people even don't know they exist or existed before, like Northern Caucasus nations, like Nordic nations in Arctics, and so on and so on. So, yes, sorry for my some reminiscences, I mean, but it's really very close to our hearts to understand people, they are nations, they are disappearing from the landscape, from the map, and it's huge loss for the world heritage. It's going in our eyes. So now floor is yours. Introduce yourself and please a few minutes, because we have only 15 minutes for that. Gentlemen, my colleague from Parliament and you as well.
So, I'll be short. My name is Bruno De Boni. I work at the European Commission, but that's irrelevant here. Recently, first I want to say how much it is important what you just said, because it has, at the same time, it is for us an issue of maybe there is a hope there that we can change the situation, but also it's something quite terrible, in terrible failure, because indeed in a few years, I studied here, I'm Italian, I grew up in Europe, we had no idea about whoever that is, and actually it's worth, and professors, I studied, among others, Soviet law and so on, and nobody informed us about any difference. They were totally under the propaganda somehow of the Soviet regime. Okay, this aside, my question, we have recently there's been an important development. The result of your work here is that the colonial people, the minorities of Russia have been recognized as 5 representatives in PACE. I never know how to pronounce that, in the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. And I think this is a very important recognition. Do you think that this will help the struggle for your rights?
We will collect the questions or interventions, and then at the end you will be able to intervene. Michael.
Thank you, dear colleague, for hosting this event, and I can resonate pretty much what you said.
Introduce yourself for the others.
Yes, sorry. My name is Lukas Sieper. I'm a member of the European Parliament for the Party of Progress from Germany, and I can resonate very much what you said, dear colleague, about the perception. I remember when my grandmother told me about the time my grandfather fought in the war, in the Second World War, and she always told me he fought against the Russians. But he didn't only fought against the Russians, he fought about so many people. And I remember my mother, when she told me that she studied in Berlin when the wall was separating the city, she always told me half of the city was occupied by the Russians. But it was not only the Russians, it was the whole Soviet Union. And I remember the first time that I really understood the difference inside Russia was when the war started in Ukraine in 2014. And I learned about the composition of the fringes of the Russian imperialistic state. And I think it's tremendously important. So my question is to you, Ruslan, as coming from media, how do you think we can combat the idea of the Russian mirror on social media most effectively, and also give voice to all the different people that Putin's regime tries to, I'm looking for the word, force together into his empire? Thank you.
Yeah, I see 2 more, 3 more. Yes, please, 4 more, and then 1 minute, 5 more, and then I will close. You was the first, then our colleagues from here, and then 2 more here around the table.
Thank you. Спасибо большое, Sao. Спасибо.
Thank you very much, Sao. Thank you very much. I have a question. My first question goes to Ruslan Valiyev. Any news about Valiyev Alstinov? And the second question goes to all of you. So after adopting the edict on stopping obligatory learning of native languages, what is the situation in terms of teaching your native languages? Do you see that your people know your native language less than before? My third question is, to what scale this large-scale invasion of Russia into Ukraine sparked the feeling of colonialism? And do you see that inside Russia, inside Bashkortostan, do you see that this is voiced somehow? Is there any bridge between you and other non-Russian nations in Russia who are in exile or in Russia? Roland?
I'm Roland Freudenstein from the Brussels Freedom Hub. And, well, my last job in Brussels was actually for the Free Russia Foundation. And, by the way, the president of Free Russia Foundation is a Buryat lady. And I also closely worked with another Buryat lady who is the president of the Free Buryatia Foundation. So lots of freedom and foundation here. No, what I want to ask, especially Ruslan, at the time, with my colleagues, we worked on, well, a concept, an idea, a plan, how to make Russia a real federation, because it is not. It's called Russian Federation, but this is not a federation. It's a centrally governed dictatorship. But what about the possibility? Do you see any chance of Russia at some point in the future becoming a true federation? Or is it preordained that, because Russia, as Rasa said, is a colonial empire currently, will fall apart? So, thank you.
Yeah, please, yes, you and then you.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Yulia Paskevska. I am from Ukraine, and especially I am from Zaporizhia. It's very close to the Crimea, and of course I know what it is. And for me, it's very clear what you create now to this platform because I also expert human rights Council of Europe. I was before there was the head of Public Council, Minister of Justice of Ukraine. I work with prisoners, and maybe I can say that I visited all prisons in Ukraine. I know everything about it. I know because I also co-author of prison system in Ukraine and of a lot of strategy of human rights according to prison. And currently I also work with this system. That's why for me it's very clear what you said about it. And also I am co-founder public initiative Legal Forces of Ukraine. Now we had a big problem with not only your nations, but at whole with Ukrainian people who stay in this territory and which is occupied. And for me, it's very important that now you say about it very openly. And thank you very much. I appreciate very much that you, to be honest, said very clear message to everybody that we are not Russian people. We have own culture, we have own identification, we have own everything. And it's a very important message which we really have to say everywhere in social media. It's have to be every day, 24 hours per 7 days. And what is my question? I know also that now in Brussels, also I based now here, and Brussels we also have ombudsman of human rights directly here from Ukraine. It's represented here. Maybe it's also can be helpful for you and useful for you to understand how we can create that plan, what you said. Because if I understand correct you, we need to do some steps. Okay, what is the first step we can do? And maybe start to negotiation or some strategy communication with Ombudsman of Human Rights. It's my proposition.
Yeah. Thank you so much for organizing this. My name is Willem Hoefnagels from the Netherlands, and I'm starting up EU Academy in Kiev with universities from the West and universities Tarashenko and so on. These very short remark, so it will save time, about what Lucas just said. How do we do with social media? I think Raza did very well in saying not Russia, but colonial Russia. And everybody knows People's Republic of China or China. You use both. I hope in a short time we will talk about colonial Russia everywhere and not only Russia. Call it like it is, and then African peoples, they also know more about colonial Russia. If we can get rid of Latakia in a harbor and airport in Syria, Africa might be less in hands of Russian propaganda and military, and they can become better partners of us. And I think the countries from the Baltic states are very good in having these contacts, whereas France and Germany, they are seen as colonial powers. So call it colonial Russia, and that's no question, so saving time.
This is what I am doing every time, being in Africa as well.
Perfect.
Yes.
Thank you. My name is Sergei Yerofeev. I'm a sociology professor from the United States of America, but I worked many years ago with European Commission developing universities in the early years of post-Soviet Russia. My question basically has been already asked by Roland, and that's to do with federalism. You don't have time to answer, but it's more like a feedback from all of us for you. We would like one day to know what you think about federalist future of those huge territories and how representatives of different nations, cultures can work together to achieve a true federation.
I promise you that it's not the last meeting together with Stefania this term, so we will have follow-up of all those questions. So now short interventions by all our three speakers, 1 minute each.
Да, спасибо.
Yes, thank you. I will do it quick. For supporting indigenous peoples and political prisoners, we have a suggestion. We have the Godfather program when the European parliamentarian or celebrities can become godparents of families and political prisoners. We are ready to provide information on these people systemically this is not about providing money, but about supporting people in an open space. Speaking of native languages, we had 15 schools in the Crimean Tatar language. They tried to stop it, but parents protected. And then all Ukrainian schools were stopped. Only one stayed. Right now, they try to open military classes. Parents are against it. And speaking of the Crimean Tatar classes, they try to cut the number of classes in favor of Russian language classes. If parents want their children to study their native language, they do not accept the application for schooling of their children. When we speak about colonization of the Crimean Tatar people, we're first of all interested in future deoccupation of Crimea and the future of Ukraine in European space. And when we speak about occupation, then occupation of Crimea was the first of the reasons for human rights violations and military crimes. And after deoccupation of Crimea, only then we will learn the scale of human rights violations committed. We document criminals who violate human rights and who commit military crimes. So the countries that have the laws similar to the Magnitsky law get information on that from us. If the European Union supports this activity, we will appreciate. And naturally, we would like to have more communications and indeed for the European Union to continue supporting Ukraine and the Crimean Tatars will be fully happy when the Ukrainian territory, including Crimea, are fully deoccupied. Valentina? Thank you. A few words about the Sámi language. I'm a girl who studied for 11 years in a boarding school because we were removed from our families. And we were not able to study the Sámi language in no way. And then they provided vocational classes on Sámi language. But we were teenagers and we were not interested. And then when we grew up, we started learning the language. This language was deeply in my heart, in my family. And when I got back to the family, I was able to study the language. I continue practicing and I find more and more sources in our language. In 1990s, from grades 1 to 4, the Sámi language was taught. And then it was fully sequestrated in favor of Russian language classes. Still, we raised the issue, addressed various authorities, and they would respond, we have no teachers, we don't have textbooks, you have another alphabet. So we hoped for change, but my optimism has deteriorated. Because I keep monitoring the situation, I can see what's going on, and there's the linguistic diversion. They do nothing for the indigenous peoples, for these peoples not to have their identity, culture, language, for them not to merge, not to join, not to show solidarity. And this happens with all indigenous peoples in the Russian Federation. And there's another comment. Every time they say that we are small peoples, we are minorities. No, we are not small, but we are indigenous. The only difference is that we are small in quantities, but we are indigenous people in our own homeland. Thank you. Okay, 5 questions in 1 minute. I will do my best. Speaking of social media, there is this problem. It's good that you are paying attention to that, so we shall allocate resources for that. Kremlin allocates huge resources to social media to promote the Russian world. Vaitsinov is okay. We used to contact each other for some time, but now I know that his family keeps silence for his term to expire. He got 4 years. In our terms, this is not much. Speaking of native languages, starting from 2017, the number of those students who study Bashkir language reduced. students, high school students, spend their Bashkir language class hours to study Russian language because they need to take a Russian exam to get higher education, because there is no higher education in national languages of the indigenous peoples. Luckily, we have liaison between our people in exile and people inside Russia. So I believe that this liaison is operational. And there was a question about real federalism in Russia. I'm afraid there is no chance. This is a forced conclusion. History repeats, and a new attempt to design something similar to real federation will be doomed at the next next cycle of history. So we do not rely on that.
Communicate myself, I also was forced to learn Russian language, but sometimes I say that is the only good thing I got during the occupation of Soviet Union, because now I can understand those crazy Kremlin outlets with nuances and also communicate with some people. They also were and still are Russified, but nevertheless. 3 points only at the end. First one, again, my thanks to Stefania Kulayeva, Olga, my team, and Stefania, you are my hero, really, know this. And I think since still, until I will stay here as member of European Parliament this term, I think we have to do more events together to have follow-up. Second, yesterday we 46 members of European Parliament, we sent out a letter to President of the Commission, European Council, High Representative, asking to initiate the designation of the FSB and Rosgvardia under the EU terrorist list. I think it will be long way for that, but nevertheless, to raise this question, because it's not only about Ukrainian occupied territories. We basically made this appeal because of that, but also everything FSB is doing for that. And the third and the last on federalization and everything. First of all, we have to help Ukrainians to win this war. Without that, it will be nothing, no changes in Russian Federation. So my last words are Slava Ukraini.